لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم وقل رب زدني علما. أما بعد. So, continuing with the Battle of Badr, the most decisive event up to now, and perhaps therefore it's called Yawm al-Furqan, the day of decisiveness, the day of differentiation between Haqq and Batil. So, in last sitting we heard about the preparation for the battle, and now we find ourselves ready to actually enter into the battle itself. After, if we remember, we find a huge discrepancy between the camp of the Muslims and the camp of the non-Muslims. And I don't know if we mentioned last time, but there's a very interesting point that we may have mentioned or not, I don't remember. But we'll mention it now in any case. If it's a repeat, then let it, if we repeat it, it gets more understood. So, one of the interesting events that took place, there were many lessons. One of the lessons was that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though he shows brilliance in his setting up of his forces and in his strategy, however, when he came to Badr and he actually decided on a place of campment, so one common Ansari came up to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, is this a place which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown to you to get down? Or is this your own sort of assessment? And so Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam affirmed the latter. So he said, if that's the case, this is not the place to get down. Very straightforwardly. And he said, and he explained why. He said, because actually there were several wells in Badr. And so they had camped at the first well. So having done so, then so these other wells are going to be exposed to Quraysh. They could actually take control of that water. And that's going to be a disadvantage for the Muslims. So he said, we should move forward and have all of the wells behind us, and we camp at the last well so that we've, consolidated all the water. They don't get any water. And so that's in fact what they did. And when Quraysh actually did come, they had no water. The other thing was that the night before the actual encounter, was that there was a slight rain which came upon the Muslims, and there was a very intense rain that came on the kuffar. And this is also mentioned in Surah Al-Anfal, and very amazingly, the light rain actually gave a compactment, to the land over there, so it gave them better footing and better maneuverability. At the same time, very interesting, that during the night, some of the companions actually had a wet dream, and they went into a state of janaba, and they don't have any, and they didn't have any water actually at that particular time. And so, what are we going to do? We're going to face the enemy in the state of janaba. That's not going to be good. That's going to be really disastrous. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the water, and from that and Shaitan was behind saying, see, you're finished, this is not going to work. And يُذْهِبُ عَنْكُمْ رِجْزَ الشَّيْطَانِ. So that's also one of the hikmats, or the divine intercessions here. So they actually found water, they were able to take baths, and they were fully confident once again. So now again, we mentioned about that there was a lot of difference of opinion in the camp of the kuffar. Because after all, the main reason they came there was to preserve their caravan. The caravan got away, so now why should they expose themselves to danger? And after all, they are their kinsmen, and so why should we unnecessarily? But Abu Jahl, he was, there was two things. One thing is that he was Abu Jahl, and he was the arch enemy of Islam. And he could never, stand to see the Muslims enjoying any kind of supremacy or comfort or security, and so obviously he wanted to squash all of that. Second thing is that it was also a very critical strategy for Quraysh also, because now, the Muslims are getting this upper hand and they're showing supremacy, in the region. And so that's a threat to Quraysh and their supremacy and they're being considered, the tribe. And so Abu Jahl also realized that, if we don't really put a major hurt on these Muslims, it's going to be very bad for us. Politically, it's going to be very shaky. So he had also a very strong, political incentive to, not only give the Muslims a good blow, but moreover make an attempt to totally squash them altogether, put out the light of Islam altogether. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is going to complete His light, whoever likes it or doesn't. However, as we mentioned earlier, there was quite a few camps, that there was a number of individuals, a number of the chieftains themselves, they didn't really want to be there, but it was like saving face. So when you have an army, regardless of your numbers and regardless of your adad and udad, as we say, your equipment and your numbers, but if you don't have a singleness of purpose and a very lofty purpose which is motivating you, it's not going to work. Look at our American forces in Vietnam and Afghanistan and all these other places. It was a joke. One of the reasons was because the people didn't even want to be there. Right? What are we doing here, killing these people for what? We don't even understand what's going on here. We don't even want to be here. So he had a very similar situation here, right? So on the other hand, the Muslims, on the other hand, they had full cognizance of what they were doing there, right? And, also, Abu Jahl, look at the juxtapositioning between the objective of Abu Jahl and the objective of Rasulullah and the Muslims. Abu Jahl's objective was to show the Arabs our might, and then we're going to have this big party in Badr, and we're going to drink wine, and the dancing girls are going to come, we're going to slaughter camels and feed everybody and just show our arrogant pride to everyone, And as for the Muslims, they want to see that the light of Islam, it remains and flourishes and spreads. So huge difference. And so the result accordingly. So now getting back to the the modus operandi and sort of the details. Now all of that taken place, and now the stage is set to begin the battle. Now it's also we can highlight the fact that battles used to be real battles of men. People would come out there and they would fight. They would be hiding someplace, لا يقاتلونكم جميعا إلا في قرى محصنة أو من وراء جدر. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the fighting of the Jews, what they do, they don't come right straight out in front of you. They hide behind the walls. They find themselves in fortified positions, and then they shoot, at you. That's what war is today. They're all sitting behind it with all this security, and they push some buttons and blow up half the world, and that's not a battle of men. That's a battle of cowards, really. But people were courageous in those days, so they used to start the battle. Number one, there would be this is the one contingent, and the enemy they would face, and they would actually have a hand-to-hand combat. And before they would do that, they would have these one-on-ones kind of a thing. To start off the battle, there would be some one-on-ones. And so Utbah ibn Rabi'a and his brother Shayba and his son Walid, they came out, okay, we're challenging people and we want somebody who's of our status, our status in positioned, in the tribes. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sent who? Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, his cousin. So this is how the thing starts, and that's going to be a very decisive move. Now, who wins that? That's going to have a huge impact on the morale of either side. So Sayyidina Hamza and Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they quickly dispose of their opponent. And as for Utbah and Ubaidah, they each hit each other. They're both out of commission. Ali and Hamza radiallahu anhum, they come back and they take him out, Utbah, and take her, and take Ubaidah back to Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, resting his head on the knee of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. He gives him the glad tidings of being the first martyr in Islam and his place in paradise, and he passes away, the first martyr in the battle. Before that, actually, there was the first person who got killed in the battle actually was not Ubaidah, however. There was another mushrik, one of the leaders, who, as we said, the Muslims, they captured all the water holes, so one of these fellows came out and he said, I will destroy this water hole, or I will drink from it, or I'll die in the process. And he died in the process. So he was actually the first casualty of the war. The first martyr was Sayyidina Ubaidah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And now, of course, the battle begins. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also showing his expertise, he gives us instructions. Very interestingly, he says, don't take your swords out when they first start advancing, but have your archers ready. And the Ansar were well known for their archery. And so let's use this, this advantage to our advantage. And so he told them, do not take out your swords until they're right on top of you. In other words, use your bows and your arrows as far as possible until they actually are upon you, and then, begin with hand to hand. And in the meantime, Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, actually Mu'adh ibn Ubadah radiallahu ta'ala had, probably we mentioned that last time, he created a little sort of shed for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be out of the heat and so forth. And he and other members of the Ansar were guarding that. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, during the battle, would go back and forth, go into the battle lines and encourage his people, and then go up to the shed and make dua, and then go back down. So he was back and forth in connection with his creator and in connection with his ra'iyah, which is an amazing thing. And during that time, it was also very interesting that, he was in this, you can imagine, the type of prayer and the concentration and the continuation. We call it, in Arabic, ilha, continuing again and again, pleading with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala was also with Rasul. He said, Ya Rasulullah, it's enough. He's already promised you, Now, if we take that incident and we compare it to, if you remember, during the Hijrah, so the same Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, Abu Bakr also in that cave. Abu Bakr is the one he's really, nervous about the whole situation. Rasul alayhi salatu was just cool and calm. So why the difference here? Why he was cool and calm here, and why he was really, anxious and, worried, and continued to make this insistence, in his prayers and these long, long prayers. Allah knows best. Probably what is most probably manifest is that in the case, it was only the two of them, Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam and Abu Bakr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is definitely going to protect his prophet and his companion. So for his own personal safety, no issue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take. Now, as he mentioned also, and in part of one of the prayers that is narrated, that Rasulullah said, this is Quraysh who have come, Ya Allah, with all of their arrogance and all of their, abstinence and so forth, And so he made, of course, a prayer against them. At the same time, he said, if this small group, this small band, this 313, if they're destroyed, فَلَن تُعْبَدْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَبَدًا, you won't be worshipped on the earth. If this group is destroyed, that's the end of Islam. Nobody else on the planet. So here, the attention of Rasulullah is not for himself. The intention is for his community, for his ummah. And that's why we find him in these long, long, drawn-out du'as for his ummah, for his own personal safety. He's quite content with that. But that's the focus of his concern. Wallahu a'lam. And also, very interestingly, there's two events where this took place. The first one is here. Actually, this took place also earlier on in Hijrah, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam took a handful of dust and threw it in the eyes of the people, and nobody saw the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaving. So here also, he picked up a handful of dust and threw it in the face of Quraysh, and it's mentioned that every single one of these 1,000 people was struck with some particle of dust, and he was saying, Shahat al-wujuh, may the faces be, humiliated, and turned away. And they were all affected by this. So all of these things are happening, and Quraysh they're just step after step, they're losing their morale, right? And probably one of the most amazing things of this whole incident was that Abu Jahl was also making a prayer. What prayer would he make? In fact, he's making a prayer unknowingly against himself. He says, "O Allah, let the side which severs relations of kinship and fabricates innovations be destroyed today." So obviously, who is that? That's him and his band, right? It's amazing, So, of course, he didn't even need to make that prayer, but doing so, he's just sealed his own fate all the more. Allahu Akbar. What other very interesting things we have here? And then, of course, we have just amazing displays of bravery and help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, keeping in mind that, as we mentioned, the angels were sent down. And of course, Jibreel alayhi salam himself would have been more than sufficient, right? But no, 1,000, then 3,000, then 5,000. And it's also mentioned that generally angels would be sent for succour, for sort of, motivation and sort of stand, and sort of. But here, in Badr, they actually fought. And there's the narrations, of the sometimes a Sahabi would swing his sword and 3 or 4 heads would roll. So what was going on? So there was quite a lot of unseen, not only the morale and the courageousness of the Muslims, who were afraid of nothing. And Nabi Sallallahu, as they entered into battle, he said, whoever is fighting here for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and solely and sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let him take the glad tidings of martyrdom and entrance into paradise. So Umar ibn Humam, he's hearing this. He says, Bakhin, Bakhin, wow, isn't this wonderful? And he was eating dates. He looked at these dates, he said, if I wait to finish these dates, then this is too long of a lifespan. I want to get into Jannah now. He threw him, and he went into the battle, and he fought until he was killed. Allahu Akbar. And then, also very interestingly, Nabi Sallallahu it's even mentioned in the Quran that there are some mustadafin in Mecca, some of the people who were Muslims, and they were also forced to come along in Badr. And some of the mushriks of Mecca, they were not yet Muslims, but they showed a soft spot. So Nabi Sallallahu mentioned that don't kill any Hashemites, because most of them actually were, as you remember, when there was that ostracization of the Muslims and that boycott in the Shaykh Abi Talib. So all the Hashemites and all the Bani Muttalib, they were all confined in that place, and there was many of them that actually showed support, even though they may not have accepted Islam at that point. So one of them was Abu Bukhtari, and he was, although he wasn't a Hashemite, but he was someone who showed sort of a kindness, to the Muslims. So Nabi also mentioned, don't kill him if you find him as well. So one of the Ansari actually did find him in the battle, and so he announced to him. He said, "Okay, Abu Bukhtari, Prophet ﷺ has given you, a license. You're to be spared." He said, "Well, what about my friend who's here, my companion here?" I said, "Sorry." He said, "Okay. Then I'm not going to," and this is the mentality of the Arabs, and proud people. He said, "Well, if that's the case, I'm not going to, have my legacy that women in Mecca are going to say, to save my life, I, let my friend get murdered. No. If you're going to take him out, you have to take me out too." I mean, this is called, the Hamiyat al-Jahiliyyah, this false pride, for nothing, So he was taken out, unfortunately for him, as well. Umayyah ibn Khalaf also was a very interesting story of his demise. Now, Umayyah ibn Khalaf was also one of those persons who was, one of the main chieftains. And we mentioned earlier that it was mentioned that he's going to be killed, and that mention of that had been mentioned to him by Sa'd ibn Mu'adh when he was in Makkah. He was also the very close friend and ally with Abdurrahman bin Auf. Also, they had a close alliance before Islam, and that, that connection, relationship used to continue. So they're in the battle, so Umayyah sees Abdurrahman, and these kind of alliances, were very sanctified actually in the Arabs, because that was their culture, So hey, we were allies, and you look after me, so you can take me as a prisoner, basically kind of a thing. So he surrendered himself to Abdurrahman to actually protect him. So he and his son Ali, Abdurrahman escorted them and was taking them up to to safe grounds. In the meantime, Bilal radiallahu anhu, who was owned by Umayyah, and Umayyah, all that torture, if you remember Sayyidina Bilal, that was Umayyah ibn Khalaf. So now Bilal radiallahu anhu sees him. So he gave this announcement. He said, by Allah, I will not live if Umayyah ibn Khalaf remains alive. It's either me or him. No way. So then Abdurrahman tries to, reason with him. Wait a minute, this is my prisoner, nothing doing. And then he called to some Ansar and he gave the same announcement. Other Ansar came. And it's funny, in the hadith it's mentioned that he's trying to hide under the legs of Abdurrahman, and they're going after him with their swords, and ultimately they get him and he's gone. Umayyah ibn Khalaf. And actually the big chieftains of Quraysh, they're all done away with in Badr, subhanAllah. So Abu Jahl is gone. There's one Mu'adh and Mu'awwad. Two guys. Also Abdurrahman, he mentions, this is also mentioned, that before the battle starts, he's seeing that on this one side is this young boy and another young boy on this side. He's saying, oh, this is kind of shaky. Had it not been that I have two strong guys along with me. So one of these young boys says, Ya uncle, Ya oh uncle, He said, do you know Abu Jahl? Yeah. He said, show him to me, because I hear that he has strongly reviled Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I want to take him out. He's looking at this young boy, So it kind of, boosts his. Then the other, on this side, he said the same thing. So where's Abu Jahl? So ultimately, the one of them, Mu'adh, he actually finds Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl was surrounded, mind you, with a whole contingent, of Quraysh. This is our Sayyid al-Wadi, they used to call him, the chieftain of the valley of Makkah. So there's, and somehow this young boy got through them, and gave him a pretty nasty blow and cut off half of his leg. Now his son, Ikramah, who wasn't a Muslim at the time, his Islam is an amazing story. We'll come to that sometime in the future, quite in distant future from that. So his son Ikramah chopped his arm. This Mu'adh, he chopped his arm and it was dangling by a piece of flesh. That's it. The arm was just cut off and it was just held by a piece of skin. And he continued to fight like that. I mean, can you imagine that? We get our little finger, hurt. That's the end of the story, right? They have to bring a stretcher and take us off. This fellow is still fighting. And then he says, when it got in the way too much, I put it under my foot and pulled it off because it was just getting in the way. And now, amazingly, he lived for 30 years after that. He didn't die from that. I mean, you get your arm, all that blood you're going to lose and all that. But subhanAllah, subhanAllah saved him. So now the other one, Mu'awwad, so Abu Jahl is not done yet, So now Mu'awwad, he gets his chance and he gives him a really good bash and takes him out, but he's not dead yet. And then ultimately when the battle is over, and Nabi alayhi salam says, go and look in the dead and see who's been killed among the. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, who was he was one of the great Sahabis and one of the very close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But at any rate, in structure he was a very small and very thin, individual. And also, he was a very poor fellow. I mean, he used to, graze sheep for Quraysh. And also, Abu Jahl he was one of, since he didn't have people to defend him, he went through a lot of travail at the hands of Abu Jahl. And now here he meets him, And then he says, oh, so you see what the turn of events has brought, And again, then he asked Abu Jahl, okay, who's winning? Who won the war? And so he said, not what's going to make you happy. Allah and His Rasul. So then he takes his sword, and this Abu Jahl, he says, Kad rakibta yani sa'uban. Yeah. It's amazing, In this very end, now he's going to lose his life, and he still has to show he's somebody. He says, you've really, undertaken a magnanimous thing to kill the great man of Quraysh. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud just took his head right off, and that was the end of Abu Jahl. Allahu Akbar. So, that being the end of the war, and obviously whoever was routed, and the rest of the Quraysh fled. 70 people were killed, 70 of the Quraysh were killed, 70 of them were made prisoners. Only 14, by the way, 70 and 70 is what, 140. There was only 313 of the Muslims. So they killed or captured almost half of their own number. That's quite amazing, right? Whereas, from their own ranks, they only lost 14. So now the martyrs were buried, properly by Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And as for those, for Quraysh and all those, the Qawm al-Natin, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this putrid lot, of polytheists and enemies of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, they found this empty well that was all dried up, and they took all of those and threw them in the well. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, after that, he made an announcement to the people in the well. He said, oh, you people of the well, I found that the promise of my Lord was true. Did you not find the promise of your Lord also true? So Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, they're dead hot. How they don't hear anything. He says, no, you are not hearing any better than what they're hearing now. So after that announcement, now the war is officially over. And the Muslims are now returning back to Medina, and then we have other issues now. We have now a new scenario. We have booty. We have spoils of war. We have other issues, and inshallah, in our next chapter, we will look into those issues in the aftermath of Badr, which is also quite an amazing chapter. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.